people are naturally resilient, but you can convince them that they're not. And you can convince them to engage in the cognitive distortions that we talk about there. And that's, catastrophizing is a cognitive distortion that will make you miserable. And we're teaching people to absolutely catastrophize about problems that are actually fixable, and filling people with young people with just terror about the future, thinking that somehow that's going to make them do something that we think is, or some people think is like socially positive. And it's like, no, that's messed up on so many different levels.
So give me that again to make sure I'm clear. Just say that again, please.
The average of students for this year who said that violence, that answered not that it's never acceptable, that it's, at least sometimes, often, or always or rarely acceptable, was something like a third of students thought that. And of course the answer is it's never acceptable at a university to respond with violence.
We're seeing our institutions crumble. It's so obvious to me how we solve these problems. I mean, this is so uncomplicated. It couldn't possibly be more uncomplicated. Like, if somebody plagiarizes, especially if they're a serial plagiarist, you fire them.
Yeah. And that's the crisis that I don't think people fully get, because right now, when people are saying, oh, the woke kind of fever is breaking and people don't seem quite as crazy as they were in 2020, and it's kind of like, okay, 2020 is a pretty high bar, to be clear there.
I think that should give us courage, exposure to other people's perspectives.
It's moving us in a good direction.
Welcome to Conversations with Peter Boghossian. I just wrapped up a great chat with my friend Greg Lukianoff. Greg is the CEO of FIRE, F-I-R-E, and he's the author of The Coddling of the American Mind with Jonathan Haidt, the uber best-selling book, and The Canceling of the American Mind with Ricky Schlott. We talked about free speech, college campuses, rankings. We talked about what it's like to know a lot of people who move in the same space. And I thought that was an interesting part of the conversation. We talked about, what is name dropping and what is not name dropping. And we talked about how to reform, if at all reform is possible, of our institutions, what free speech is, and why free speech matters. And I hope you enjoy our conversation. Thanks so much. Greg Lukianoff, welcome to Conversations with Peter Boghossian. How are you?
I'm pretty good, Peter. It's good to see you.
Yeah, it's good to see you. It's good to see you too. Where are you now?
Washington, D.C., which is about a quarter of the FIRE staff is based in D.C. now, and more than the other half, is largely in Philadelphia.
Yeah, we should. I haven't been to D.C. in a long time. We should go there.
Yeah.
Last time I saw you, it was at the opening of your film, which I, truly, I'm not saying this. I truly love the film. Honestly, I went with a friend of mine, Ben Browder, the actor from Farscape and Stargate. He's become quite a good friend of mine. He loved the film too. And
great.
Yeah, okay. So first of all, how was it for you to be so open and honest about things in your life in that film? Like you were really feeling in that film.
Yeah. So, for listeners, the film we're talking about is Coddling of the American Mind, the documentary. I co-authored a book called the same name, but with my friend Jonathan Haidt.
Yep.
And the primary argument was, that essentially we're teaching young people the mental habits of anxious and depressed people, which is resulting in, on campus, so we saw this coming in 2014, a disaster for academic freedom and free speech, but also a disaster for their mental health. And in the movie, I talk a lot about something that I only revealed in the book for the first time publicly ever, is that what led to me thinking about writing the book in the first place was my own suicidal depression in 2007.
Yeah.
And as I was recovering from that, studying cognitive behavioral therapy and being like, wow, it's kind of like we're teaching young people the opposite of this. But it was funny going to the documentary and bringing actually a friend of mine who I hadn't seen in a while to, it was like, oh, you're in town. Let's go watch this documentary. And I kind of forgot how raw and open I was about the details of trying to kill myself back in 2007. So that
Yeah.
was a little bit like, oof, wow. I hope this isn't awkward. And of course, I'm half British, so like part of me was like, I hope this isn't awkward for her.
Yeah, Reed went to that with me, and we commented. We really enjoyed that. We thought that was, I don't know, that was just such an honest thing. Were you worried when you did that that the people who hate you for your advocacy of free speech would just latch onto that and just go crazy on you because of that? Because that was one of my first thoughts when I saw that. I'm like, oh God, all these people hate Greg, and now they're going to go
Yeah.
crazy on him because of this.
Yeah, it's one of those things where people have hated me for various reasons for a long time, so it's like, you gotta kinda get over it.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
and go and the thing is, if you go after someone for a suicidal depression that they cop to, like, you're not making me look bad.
Yeah,
You know? And it's
yeah,
also it puts them in a difficult situation because these are people who claim to be so concerned about mental health,
yeah,
and honestly, the best thing they could do in dealing with the argument that me and Haidt make in the book, but also that we make in the documentary, is
yeah,
not take us on, it's to ignore it. Because
yeah,
what it
yeah, yeah,
points out is that it's kinda like, "Listen, I know you think you care about mental health, but we've been screaming to high heaven that essentially stop teaching kids to think like depressed and anxious people,
yeah,
and
yeah,
you've ignored it, and it's been a disaster because it doesn't fit your worldview." Like, somehow it's like, "Oh, but, we're making them feel guilt and shame for, socially positive ends," and it's like, "No, it's still freaking messed up, and it's not gonna achieve, the goals that you want it to achieve unless it's primarily to make them feel anxious and depressed."
yeah.
And I think that there is an aggressive attempt to either misconstrue some of the arguments that me and Haidt were making, or just ignore it entirely.
Hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. I looked the other day, and that book is still selling like hotcakes. Holy shit, dude! Like that's crazy. I mean, you guys must have sold hundreds of thousands of books. I mean,
I
yeah,
I remain floored by how successful, Coddling the American Mind is. Like, I'm very proud of it, to be clear, like, I'm very proud of that book, but the fact that people are still buying it like it's a new book is blows me away.
yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. And that's the statistic that I've talked about before about books, because sometimes people send me emails who want to be authors or whatever. And, what is a success? Well, I don't know. Success is whatever. It's just like, that's not one. The objective metric is 1% of books sell more than 5,000 copies. I think my last one is, I don't know, well over 100,000 copies. But Douglas Martin was telling me that the translations, uh, publishers like to see that the books were translated in multiple languages and they're picked up, not necessarily for the revenue, but it's kind of like a prestige thing.
Yeah.
So the coddling must have gotten translated into, I mean, I think I'm at 7 languages. I mean, you guys must have been like some crazy number of languages.
Yeah, I've actually got, like, all the Chinese version and Romanian and Russian, and, like, my bookshelf has all of these books, and it's an incredible honor, and and of course, like, one of the reasons why we didn't expect it to resonate so much is we also thought a lot of what we were saying was just common sense,
Mm.
you
It
know?
was a remarkable book. Yeah, I have a friend who's a severe learning disability to the extent that she can't read. Um, so she listened to it. She got it on audio,
Like severe
and
dyslexia?
no, like I don't even know what she just says. I don't even know what her learning. She's a good friend of mine. She's like one of the most severe learning disabilities. We were stuck together in the pandemic for a year, and I worked on trying to help her not put the word at the end of her sentences. Like, where's it at? Um,
Yeah.
and I saw her the other day, and she's still saying at, and then she laughs about it at the end. But she said she was profoundly moved and changed by that book. It changed her life, is what she said.
Wow.
So yeah, Reed knows her.
And I'm still trying to get people to understand, the point of the book. And I feel
What's
like,
the point of the book? What is the point of the book in your words?
to me, it's always stop teaching young people the mental habits of anxious and depressed people. Stop lying to them about them being more fragile than they actually are,
Mm,
because people are naturally resilient, but you can convince them that they're not. and you can convince them to engage in the cognitive distortions that we talk about there. And that's, catastrophizing is a cognitive distortion that will make you miserable. And we're teaching people to absolutely catastrophize about
Right.
problems that are actually fixable,
Totally.
and filling people with young people with just terror about the future, thinking that somehow that's going to make them do something that's we think is, or some people think is like socially positive. And it's like, no, that's messed up on so many
Right.
different levels. Because
Right.
one, anxious and depressed people are terrible activists.
Hmm.
While there is something called depressive realism, there's no such thing as anxious and despairing realism.
Interesting. Yeah.
And I think that's how you end up with it, like the display of like the when it comes to some of the climate change stuff, the activists going out and like defacing priceless
Paintings.
works of art, and it's kind
Yeah.
of like, no, you could also be advocating for nuclear or massive solar farms, or like they're
Yeah, or you could be advocating for nothing and just quietly picking up trash out of a stream.
you could there's a lots of there are things that can be done, and I've been making this argument like in Democrat circles for
Right.
in 2003, I actually got all my fancy Democrat friends together and was like, we should refocus the party on energy policy, and they all thought
Mm,
that was nuts. But it's kind of like the sheer number of problems you can solve if we had vast amounts of cheap energy.
yeah. Yeah, there's a chart. There's a chart. Read if you can find the chart. Like, no country can be successful without energy, and
Oh,
it has a line. Lindsay has tweeted it out. Said something like, this can't be tweeted enough. I was thinking about yesterday. I was thinking about this free speech thing, and you've obviously been really at the center of it. Oh yeah, here it is. Let's pull this up so that we can see it. Yeah, no such thing as a low energy rich country, and then it gives all of the it just breaks down the countries. So yeah, I think that's an important and Germany getting off of nuclear, I think, is important, and
what a
the
disaster.
yeah, and the fuel prices, and Reed and I are going to Eastern Europe again pretty soon. The fuel prices because of the Russian oil and natural gas embargoes, it's been a tremendous hardship for those people.
Yeah.
So I was thinking about this free speech thing, something you've dedicated your life to and been at the center of. Are there any commonalities among people who oppose free speech? Is it like a dispositional thing? Is it like a tendency toward authoritarianism? Is it kind of like a moral impulse that overrides a rational consideration, or moral impulse gone awry? Like, are there any commonalities among people who are opposed to freedom of speech? Is it that they're just like they view themselves on the losing side? I mean, what is it?
Yeah, I mean, there's a great answer to the question of like what causes poverty, and a libertarian economist, I can't remember, maybe it was McCloskey or something like that, said,
Mm-mm.
no, 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 poverty is a natural state. What you should be asking yourself is what causes wealth, and what
Mm,
causes prosperity, because that's comparatively rare in human history. So
mm,
my Substack, I call the eternally radical idea, because I think in every generation, people rise up to oppose freedom of speech.
mm,
Because the one thing you generally don't have to convince people of, or at least not work very hard to, is that they should have freedom of speech.
right.
Convincing people that everyone else should have it
Right.
it's kind of an advanced technique, and
Right.
it's it's what small L liberalism was supposed to be about to a degree, is
Mm,
retraining us to think of this much more sophisticated way. Because it's like I get so annoyed with the idea that kind of like an entire class of people who kind of think free speech is this sort of like primitive idea, and that we have to get away from this the simpleton's way of looking at things,
mm,
and it's
mm.
like, but you're arguing for giving power more power in order to fix things, like
Yeah.
it,
So I even wonder if it's maybe their rational faculties have broken down so that they don't see hypocrisies, or they don't. I'm just trying to think. In research, you look for emerging themes, and
yeah.
I'm just wondering if there's an emerging theme among people who are opposed to free. I mean, I can't think of what it would be, but then again, I'm not a researcher in that area. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, my point is that I actually think that you have to teach people to understand liberal systems. You have to
Yeah.
understand everything from capitalism to what Jonathan Rauch calls liberal science. Like that's the sophisticated idea. It's understanding that a decentralized system can actually produce far better results. It is the thing that, you actually require some IQ to like understand that. But I feel like one of the big opponents to, not just freedom of speech, but human freedom all throughout history. And I gave a toast at our gala last year. I had the fun situation of having to be the last one to speak and having to speak after Killer Mike gave probably like the best speech on free speech I'd
Oh,
ever
wow.
heard. But I gave a talk called Fight the Guardians. And basically, I was talking about this recurrent sort of personality type throughout history. And I'm definitely with Karl Popper in that I think Plato was a totalitarian villain. Like I think that he smart, sure, but so what?
Mm,
That essentially the kind of person who thinks that they and people like them can see the actual form of the truth,
mm,
which the rest of us
mm,
can't actually see,
mm, mm,
those are dangerous people.
mm, mm,
And the fact that that aspect of Plato's thought was so appealing to an
mm,
entire intellectual class and is recurrently
mm,
appealing to them, it's like, yes, keep these people away from power, but
mm,
by all means. And I think that it's something that it's one of the dangers of a particular kind of intellectual. Now, that being said, when Steve Pinker, like, who's on our advisory council and has
mm,
become a friend, like when he wrote about different levels of sort of distribution of IQ according to political leanings. One of the things that he pointed out was kind of like, yeah, but actually, yes, that as you there are a lot of people who are high IQ self-describe as being liberal, but when you dig into it a little bit more, they tend to be more classically liberal, like in the sense of understanding liberal systems. So
funny. Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah,
think that sometimes, and then this is something that name dropping a fair amount here, but Megan McArdle pointed out at one
yeah.
point when I was talking about there's a special kind of like smart person who essentially is going to be hostile to freedom of speech because they think people like them should be in charge of everything. And she made the point. It's like, Greg, I think you're really talking about midwits.
Yeah, yeah,
Like
yeah,
people are kind of like because it is a pretty simplistic thought that if people like me and were in charge of everything would be fine.
yeah. Yeah, I wanna say something that, you gave it as just kind of an off comment, but the whole name dropping thing, it's like that's just the circle, like, we've just become friends with these people, so
Yeah,
it's not like I'm name dropping, it's just that these people are in my space, they email me, I hang
yeah,
out with them, like, I didn't talk about Ben at the beginning because, I mean, he was there and he asked you a question at the end, he caught you at the end, I think, but, it's like when we talk about whoever we talk about, it's just because these people, this is what we're all, it's like when actors are with other actors, they talk about other actors, they know each other because that's just what they do. They're in the same business. So it's
yeah.
not like
My,
you're trying
my,
to make yourself look better. It's just what it is.
my wife recommended I not call Steve Pinker Steve because it sounds like someone calling Robert De Niro Bobby De Niro, and it's like,
Oh,
but it's
yeah, yeah.
weird for me to call him Steven. Like,
Yeah, yeah.
but the one thing that I think that we have in common, Peter, among many things, is we never. We still appreciate these people, even though that they're our friends. Like like
Totally.
you were talking about having Douglas Murray at your house, and talk about someone that I'm green with envy on his ability to write. Like I'm
Mm,
proud of my own writing, but every time I read a book by him, I'm like, oh, come on, like
yeah.
show off.
Yeah, he's great. He's great. So yeah, and it's funny. It's funny when you really get to know people. I'm always I didn't plan to talk with you about this today, but I'm always struck by they have so many commonalities. Like nobody goes by doctor.
Oh God,
Nobody is nobody jockeys for like, oh, I need to know more or I need to be the smartest guy in the
yep.
room. Or there's just an you know, it's really like it's hard to explain. It's like you be sitting to hang out with people and you're like, holy shit, like this is a legit smart, knowledgeable,
Oh yeah.
humble. and they know so much. There's a reason that they have risen up as public intellectuals, and I really do like the lack of jockeying. Anyway, that's just another
Well, no,
thing.
but it is something like I could even this is even an acting tip. Like if you want to convince people that you're crazy smart, sometimes I think, and I've run into this, that there are a couple of ticks that sometimes people will give off, like talking like way too fast, and like but then also being a little bit haughty and maybe like a little bit rude, and they think that codes for smart. And when I think about all the actual like
Interesting.
legit geniuses I know, they're funny, humble, absolutely willing to say I don't know if they don't know something.
Totally, 100%.
So it's kind of like, actually, like a lot of what you're coding for is coding for like someone who's trying to impress people, but actually is
Yeah.
not what the smartest people we've ever met or anything like.
Yeah, and they're willing to ask a question if the question will make them look stupid because they want to know
Yeah,
the answer to the question.
exactly.
And I find that to be so interesting. It just I love being the least smart person in the room
Oh
and the
yeah,
least knowledgeable person in the room, and I find myself increasingly in those.
in those rooms.
Yeah, I find myself increasingly in those rooms, and I really
That's
enjoy
great.
it.
Well, it's something that I've had to at Fire, Fire is now 120 people, and when I was hired, I was like the fifth person at Fire.
Mm,
And, like, we
mm.
both, and it tends to be a pretty young organization, and I'm about to turn 50, but I've been here for 23 years, so
50-year baby.
it, but it was funny, when we started introducing some more experienced lawyers, people have been, so we added, like, Bob Corner-Revere to our team, who's probably, like, the best First Amendment litigator in the country. And I think some of the younger lawyers were kind of intimidated by that, to be like working with someone who knows that much more, than they ever would. And I'm like, no, dude, that's the good stuff. Like
Yeah,
having people who
yeah,
work under you who are smarter than you, and certainly more specialized. Like
totally.
that's when you're killing it.
Yeah, totally. I I wonder. Yeah, all right, well, I wanna get back to the free speech stuff. I don't know, but it has been. I constantly marvel at the surreal nature of my life, like, the
Yeah.
people who I just communicate with daily are it's just completely surreal to me, like, I mean, even I'm gonna go to New York and, I mean, I just like we're having dinner with Andrew Yang, and I mean, just the whole thing. It's just and I don't say any of this to name drop, maybe we'll edit this out, but it's just a very interesting, just a very interesting life. I just never wanted or expected any of this. I just wanted a small job. I just wanted to write and to just, teach and to just, and then madness overtook. But okay, anyway, a few things. So Fire just announced the free speech rankings,
Yeah.
and so talk to me about that.
Oh man, yeah. So the free speech rankings was a passion project, that we started up, about 5 years ago, when Nico Perino, the executive vice president of Fire, had just gotten back from Williams, and I had just gotten back from a talk at Haverford.
Yeah,
And I'd gone through a period where I'd been visiting a lot of more like working class schools. And even though I know that those schools have free speech problems that are not as bad as elite colleges, because working
yeah,
class people still have a head on their shoulders.
yeah, yeah,
Um, but then getting to Haverford, it kind of felt like I was in like East Berlin. Like anytime someone could get me alone, they're kind of like, nobody wants to say anything in this environment. Like everyone's terrified that they're
God,
going to
that's
get
so
canceled.
crazy. Yeah, yeah, yeah. What year was that?
That was 2019, I
Oh wow.
think.
Okay. Yeah.
And that's when Nico had just gotten back from a trip to Williams and had the exact same experience. And so we were like, you know what? We really need to quantify this.
Yeah.
And so we
Good for
started
you.
putting together the largest survey of student opinion on freedom of speech ever done. And we've been improving our methodology over the years. We started with a 50 school experiment, and now we're up to 251 schools that we rank. Um, and we've been able to, we don't just do the survey, but which has been very revealing. We have the largest database of professor cancellations that's ever been
Mhm.
assembled, the largest database of disinvitations ever put together, the largest database of speech codes at various universities, of student cancellations. So, and we put this all together with various weightings. And Sean Stevens is our chief researcher for this at Fire. And we combine them all together, and it's the most audacious evaluation of campus's commitment and
Yeah, it's
reality of
remarkable.
freedom of speech. And this year, the school that placed number one was actually University of Virginia, which
Oh,
was a
mm,
pleasant surprise, because we know that they've really been working on it. Like they've been really trying to recommit to it. Michigan Technological University finished number one last year. It was number two this year, but it probably won't surprise people too much to learn that they actually did. Do you remember what the dead
Harvard.
last? Harvard was dead last
Yeah.
year. It has now been joined by, whereas Penn was second to last year. Now second to last is Columbia, which really earned its way there. New York University is third.
Oh,
None of
really? Huh.
the Ivy League does well at all. The only
Yeah.
school I feel slightly bad for is Dartmouth, because Cyan Balak at Dartmouth has been trying.
Yeah, I have to say that when we go on college tours, I was done 2 at Dartmouth. I have to say that's the best Ivy League we go to. Like, those kids I found are fantastic. Uh, so I've been impressed with them. Greg, I don't think I told you this toward the end of my time at PSU. Gave up my little job for life there. I tried to get with a
I still can't believe how they treated you. Like,
yeah,
and the fact that
believe it.
people weren't thanking you for the whistleblowing you
I
did
know,
in
crazy, right?
Sokol
Crazy.
Squared.
And
Nuts.
I had to pull out of that resignation letter so many things. People are like, you can't put it in there, and I'm like, it's true. And it's like, no one can believe it. It's too crazy. You got to pull it out. So anyway, I tried to get a meeting with the president of the university for 5 minutes, like repeatedly. He just would not meet with me. His office told me he was too busy. So I finally got a meeting with the dean for 5 minutes. So I told the dean that um, I was deeply concerned that Portland State University had made the list of, I think it was the top 10 worst schools for freedom of speech. And the dean said, in no uncertain terms, just the dean said to me, matter of factly, it's good. It's a good thing to be on those lists. And it just blew my mind that, like,
Yeah,
I always thought that this was a bug of the system as opposed to a feature.
yeah,
Like, he's telling me that this is a feature of the system.
yeah.
But I meant to tell you that story. I hadn't told you that, but that just blew my mind.
Yeah, Canceling of the American Mind, which was my most recent book, which came out last October. It actually came out October 17th, which was not exactly an ideal time
Yeah, yeah,
for the book to come out. Definitely overshadowed by everything else that was going on, obviously.
yeah.
But what I tried to do there with my absolutely brilliant young co-author Ricky
Ricky's
Schlott,
great. So
she's
Ricky's
amazing.
terrific. We just had
Um,
dinner with her in London a little while ago. She's terrific.
yeah, no, she's freaking brilliant. And but one of the things we really tried to do in that was to layer the conformity-inducing pressures that a student would face, from high school on up. And we have a chapter called the Conformity Gauntlet, where we, like,
Right,
let's
right,
say, God forbid, you
right.
want to be like a groundbreaking, scientist. And like all the different pressures you would face from the diversity, the DEI statement that you'd have to pen at every single step of the process, the bias-related incident program, emergency hotlines, an environment in which professors and administrators admit to discriminating against people that they deem as conservative, which doesn't mean they are,
Right,
but of
right.
course, like and how devastating this all is to the creation of reliable knowledge.
Mm,
And that's
mm,
the crisis that I don't think people fully get, because right now, when people are saying, "Oh, the woke kind of fever is breaking, and people don't seem quite as crazy as they were in 2020," and it's kind of like,
right,
okay, 2020 is a pretty high bar,
right, right.
to be clear there. But the idea that right now the public If you're talking about an issue with any political valence whatsoever, the idea that the public can trust the expert class is nonsense. The pressures, like, and dealing with scholars, for example, who try to publish, great research and can't get it past like the IRBs because the IRBs
Totally.
don't like the politics.
100%. 100%. Yeah. That I don't talk about this anymore, but I'll just say this because it's interesting. So, among the initial round of complaints against me, people wanted to know where my IRB approval for this was. And I remember
I
one thing.
remember.
Yeah. So, specifically, yeah, it was if he got an IRB approval for them, he never should have gotten it. And everybody who gave approval for him, I can't remember exactly what this person said, but something should lose their jobs or something like that. And I was just so struck by, like, wow, this whole thing is just set up as a kind of political activism. Like,
Yeah.
entire wings of university architecture are just predicated on this. And I remember when I went for one of my disciplinary hearings, I was told not to render my opinion on protected classes or teach in any way that my opinion on protected classes could be known. And I'm like, what are you talking about? There's the whole departments of the university. So why me? Like, what is it about my opinion on this?
Yeah.
And just as a parenthetical, I said to them, what do I do if they ask me my opinion about whether or not black people should be kept in chains and enslaved? Right? Because that would be rendering my opinion about a protected class.
Yeah.
I mean, the whole thing is just totally insane. The whole office existed as a way to persecute political opponents, and I mean, it's just so crazy. And then now I see things like, oh well, university commits to free speech. Okay, really, in 2020, like, this is what it like. So where were you? Like, where were you? And I wonder if, like, I've often personally thought it's because presidents' salaries are too high. I think they
Mhm.
should be like, so they have a disincentive to speak out against the polity, if you will, to speak
Yeah.
out against the students, the parents, and so they just want to keep their little cush jobs and their parking spaces and their houses, et cetera. But yeah, anything you found interesting in the free speech rankings?
Oh yeah, yeah. It was nice. There was some good news. Like Claremont McKenna, has improved by a great deal. They sunk a lot in the rankings due to mishandling another number of academic freedom cases, and that was nice to see it come up. The number of students, however, who think that violence is acceptable, at least to some degree, or in rare circumstances, in response to speech, though, I think it's something like the average was something like a third of
That's
students
just
thought that.
that's just mortifying. I mean, so give me that again to make sure I'm clear. Just say that again, please.
The average of students for this year who said that violence, that answered, not that it's never acceptable, that it's at least sometimes, often, or always or rarely acceptable, was something like a third of students thought that. And of course, the answer is it's never acceptable at a university to respond with violence. And when we asked this of Oberlin last year, I mean, I think it was
Yeah.
only about half of students said that it was never acceptable. And it's just I a majority, when we listed opinions both on the right and the left that could potentially get you in trouble.
Mm,
Sorry, opinions of speakers who might come to campus. When we listed,
mm,
like, views on transgender rights and views on Black Lives Matter, and we went for both liberal and conservative, versions of this, and a majority of students thought that those speakers should not be invited, and I think we're at a super majority for some of them. Like, particularly when it was anything related to, like, transgender stuff, and it's like, if 5% of students said that these speakers should not be allowed on campus, that would be a problem. If you're saying that you've done such a terrible job of educating people as to what this whole enterprise is supposed to be about,
yeah, yeah,
that 50 to 75% of them are saying that these speakers shouldn't even be allowed to speak on campus. You're training people to
yeah.
to oppose freedom and knowledge.
Yeah, and so not only are they against people shouldn't trust the expert class, but they shouldn't trust the institutions,
Mhm.
because embedded in this, I would argue, the very structure of the institution, like DEI statements and these truly deranged bodies of literature, embedded in this is an activist paradigm that forwards very specific conclusions about very specific things that are not based in evidence, that are not tethered to reality, that are
Yeah.
clearly and conspicuously ideological, and that are not falsifiable.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, name like any hot button issue in the United States today, and you can give an example, usually multiple examples of a professor or student getting in trouble for being on the wrong side of that.
Yeah.
And so I always bring up Carol Hooven, who we
Oh,
both know.
she's great. Yeah.
She's amazing. And she's an evolutionary biologist,
God, she
and
got screwed, like
yeah,
horrifically screwed by Harvard. Holy shit.
yeah, and she went on, Fox News to talk about her book Testosterone, which is an awesome book, which I highly recommend. It's
I have not
beautifully
read it.
written, it's
Yeah. Yeah.
extremely compassionate, and she talked about, having compassion for people who are trans and even using their pronouns, but we can't pretend biological sex isn't real, and we shouldn't get rid of gendered language,
Right.
in the name of because these are useful medical terms. And then immediately, of course, the head of the DEI task force, who was actually a
On
graduate
cue.
student at Harvard,
Yeah.
starts going after her. Suddenly, students won't work her class, and Harvard doesn't have her back at all. The only people who did included, Jeffrey Flyer, for example, from
Flyer's
heterodoxy.
great.
Flyer's great,
Flyer's fantastic.
but also Pinker.
Pinker
Um,
Stevens. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, and the point that I always make with her case is like, guys, what you did to Carol was totally wrong. This is a beautiful, wonderful, thoughtful person,
Mm.
like who's just absolute genius, like who you should be proud to have on. And she got suicidally depressed, like from her treatment, and that's horrible, and that's a tragedy all by itself. But I don't think you understand what you've done to your own
Yeah.
reputation
Right.
on these matters, because
Right.
once someone knows that someone can lose their job, or face a pressure campaign to leave for saying something as taken for granted up until 15 minutes ago, that biological sex is real, like they're never going to listen to you again. And I always point out that's if it happens once. And in
Right.
canceling of the American mind, we lay out the data. We're talking about more than 1,000 examples of professors being targeted, for their speech. We know that that's a wild undercount too, because when we did
Totally.
a giant
Totally.
survey, it's about 1 in 6
Yeah.
professors.
Yeah. It's interesting. What they did to Roland Fryer was
Roland Frye,
fascinating.
which is exactly what I'm on about here.
And Claudine Gay did that to Roland
Yeah,
Fryer. I mean, it's a
because
plagiarist.
like, can you
Serial.
look into whether or not unarmed black men are disproportionately shot by
Correct.
police? And Roland went in thinking he was going to find, oh, this is going to be a layup. This is going to be easy. Obviously, they are.
Slam
And then
dunk. Yeah.
but he's a serious freaking scholar, and he looked into it, and he came to the conclusion, by the way, that he thought that American cops probably shoot too many people,
Mm.
but the evidence wasn't there that it was disproportionately unarmed black people.
Yeah. Yeah. I saw his lecture at University of Austin, which was with Barry Weiss, which was great.
He's
And
great.
that African Americans are kind of roughed up more by the police, but
Yeah.
they're not shot more. That's just
Yes.
not true. It's a myth. And the grief and the stress and what they did to him to fabricate. And it's,
Yeah.
the other thing is I find that increasingly these people have this weird, I don't know, these weird like sexual stuff. Like you just accuse people of sexual stuff if you don't like them, or
Oh,
like,
but that's been happening for a long time, and in this case, what they got Roland on was
hmm,
apparently like the worst allegation was something like off-color jokes at like a private party,
right,
earlier, and the thing
clearly
about one of the
political.
things about Roland, like it also points out that this stuff is so much about also economic class.
Hmm,
Is that Roland? He's a black scholar, but he grew up, like one of his cousins, that he was really close with, went to jail for dealing crack. Like
yeah.
he was like he was from the other side of the tracks, and but at the same time, like, he is a really honest scholar, and as soon as he actually published something that didn't really fit the preferred narrative, even though it was true, and extremely rigorous, suddenly he's under investigation under Title IX, which, by the way,
That's
I've
what happened to me. Yeah.
I've been defending freedom of speech on campus since 2001, 1 year out of law school, and I did not realize how central to the policing of speech Title IX is.
Totally, totally. It's a weaponization of yeah, that's exactly what happened to me.
And that's been since day one, by the way. Like, that was something that became so obviously clear. And now I think, to in no small degree to Fire's efforts, like, people do get that this happens all the time.
Explain to people, please, what Title IX is.
Title IX, was passed in the early 1970s, and originally, like, the idea was that colleges should admit women in addition to men. Like, essentially, if you want public funding, then you should admit both men and women. And with a carve out about discrimination on the basis of, like, women's sports, but then it got redefined as being having huge implications for sports, and that's what a lot of people think is the main thing about Title IX, and that's important, but it's not not the biggest deal to me as far as that part of it. The big deal is that partially due to existing case law, and then the Department of Education really jumping on this, and the activist class in the 1980s, and then going on, jumped on this anti-discrimination rationale for going after hate speech. They basically,
Mhm.
like, when Richard Delgado and the Mary Matsuda and Kimberly Crenshaw and all the people who contributed.
Delgado's a piece of work. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I know. Words that wound. Like the kind of the father of the modern speech codes movement. That essentially, like, they're like, well, since we know we can't actually ban things simply because they're offensive in the United States, let's try a fighting words doctrine, which was a
Yeah.
ridiculous thing because that would basically mean that you can't call a cop a fascist. Like, it's kind of like, do you really want that? And of course, the courts laughed it out of court.
And
The other
you
one was
yeah.
an anti-discrimination rationale, and that's the one that's been the most successful. And how many times, like, I've seen throughout my career, we've been approached by professors who still won't let us use their names publicly, and it's understandable. But
Yeah.
they're brought up on charges of sexual harassment, not on the basis of targeting someone sexually, but talking about sexual themes in their classrooms that are often about sexual themes.
Right.
And it's not just sex, because immediately this whole category, like the sexual harassment stuff, and this is something that also people might not get, it's immediately extended to about literally 18 other categories. So we've actually probably seen more racial harassment arguments in our time at Fire than we've seen sexual harassment, but that can be any controversial opinion argument in class, even if it's well researched, even if it's well,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah, they've gone after several people. I mean, of course, you know this far better than I. They went after Bruce Gilley at Portland
yep.
State University because of his defense of colonialism. And if anybody actually read the paper, it wasn't what people thought it was about. But they've gone after a lot of people. And then I get all these emails because we have a small nonprofit, National Progress Alliance. We get all these emails from people like, "Hey, they're coming after me. They're Title IX me. What am I supposed to do?" Sometimes I recommend them to fire. Sometimes it just depends on the case. But I think that people understand not only the perniciousness of this, but the ubiquity of it. It's just so wide. I mean, it's just everywhere. And we read, and I interviewed Charles Nagy in Florida, who's
Oh,
a
yeah.
psychology professor. Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating. I mean, he has all the variables too. So he's gay, he's an immigrant. Oh no, yeah,
He's Cuban, right?
yeah, I think so. I think so. I mean, he's a super good guy, like a
Oh,
really
yeah.
good guy. We hung out with him, had lunch with him, and his story and like what these people did to him was so crazy. But it's like every time I never cease to be amazed by how vicious these people, and they have a kind of, they have that voice, that saccharine voice. Oh, like, oh, we're just trying. And I never cease to be amazed at don't know, it's just so heartbreaking to me, but I think I'm over being heartbroken at this point,
Mhm.
and it's not even that I want vengeance. I don't. I just I think we need to build new things. Like I
Yeah,
think,
agreed.
and that's why I think it's so important the University of Austin succeed and these other institutions are succeeding, because I
Yep.
don't trust time after time. And I was just tweeting about this. People have said, "Oh, we're reformed, we're committed to free speech," and then they do it over again. And it's not like that the president doesn't want something, but you're dealing with faculty senates that are lined with people who have tenure, they have jobs for life. And I'm not going to name these people because I don't want this doxing campaign, but I just the whole system is broken. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just and then we have these lines of literature, they're just whole cloth fabricated,
Mhm.
and people are just pointing to these to inform public policies. And anytime you try, now there's a massive replication crisis, and I just tweeted something about it in economics. And these superstars in economics have basically made shit up. Like they've just completely fabricated, and then we've based public policies on this stuff.
Yep.
um, okay, so real quick, we only have 15 minutes left. I want to go over the American Association of University Professors. Can you tell us about the reversal there?
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, like it's not the biggest story in the world because the AUP has been sort of lost its way a long time ago.
Yeah, that was my union.
Yeah, the American Association of University Professors used to be the most important defender of academic freedom in the country. They came out with the 1915 and 1940 statements defending academic freedom, which are just continue to be some of the best statements on academic freedom ever. But unfortunately, it's been the case that fire in a lot of cases end up taking the cases that they aren't able to help with. So we were definitely there was some tension between us and them because we were, honestly more effective in a lot of these
Yeah,
cases.
yeah,
But the change that I've seen in the more recent past is something where they're giving more indication to being an actual threat to academic freedom. And I say that, particularly because of, Michael Barabay, who was a prominent AUP member, and Jennifer Ruth came out with this book called, I think it's
yeah.
something like it's
I wasn't going to mention them, but those are the people I was thinking of.
oh, no, but it's despicable, and
Yeah.
it is and here's the thing, people, it's the longest, most aggressive pitch for limiting academic freedom that I've ever read.
Mm,
And people just kind of gloss over it like, "Oh, who cares?" I'm kinda like, "No, they're asking for a new exception to academic freedom, about speech that can be argued to support white supremacy."
right.
And they don't
Exactly.
mean the white supremacy of just eugenics. They have a whole chapter on, and it's a sneering contempt. Like it's one of these things, particularly if you know a lot about the topic. Like it's just this like sneering book that definitely, uh, yeah,
It's
and
no surprise that she's a professor at PSU.
Yeah, yeah, no, I remember learning that, and I thought that was appropriate. But yeah,
Yeah.
but limiting it according to, white supremacy, it's kinda like that's a massive exception, and it's basically an excuse for people at the AUP to only, defend speech they agree with, which is kind of like
Right.
so yet another mechanism that basically, like, allows you to, keep the people that you agree with ideologically and get rid of the ones, to either marginalize or just flat out, not defend them and get rid of them. So the fact that the AOP got behind that book, to a degree, it's also the amazing spectacle of um, some of the people coming out and opposing it. They included people like John Carl Wilson, like who I have some respect for, but he's also the author of the Myth of Political Correctness. Like
Mm,
saying that this goes too far, and also Stanley Fish, coming out and saying that he thought it went too far. And Stanley Fish, of course, wrote a whole book called The First, which just it just blows me away, like
I know.
how
I
how
know.
I just honestly think it's just profoundly intellectually dishonest. But it
Yeah, I
also
agree.
makes the argument that we can, before we, give you people freedom of speech, we have to know what free speech is for. And I'm kind of like, wow, okay,
Yeah,
Guardian, okay,
yeah,
Guardian
I
class.
never understood his Fish's popularity. Like I never understood what people saw in Fish.
The original, there's no such thing as free speech, and it's a good thing anyway, as you know, as far as I'm concerned, is a profoundly embarrassing book, because
Mm.
it basically is at a level of sophistication that you cover in a first week of First Amendment class. You know,
Right.
where it's explained like, no, actually, not all speech is protected, but he takes that and leaps into, and therefore it's just all arbitrary what we choose. I'm kind of like,
Mm.
no, First Amendment
Mm.
law is not arbitrary. Like, threats aren't protected. That's the same
Right.
everywhere. The patterns of discriminatory harassment are not protected. Like we have narrow exceptions to it, but they're not
Mm.
arbitrary.
But
So, anyways,
yeah.
so
Yeah. Yeah.
those two professors actually ones that came out and said that they thought Barabay and Booth went too far. So I have concerns about the AUP, but then they dropped their longstanding opposition to academic boycotts of institutions, and like fire. We support your right to advocate for an academic boycott as an individual, but we also oppose academic boycotts, because basically
Right.
saying
Right. Right.
academic freedom is not supposed to be something where we at University of Chicago, will never work with anybody at the University of Leiden, because we don't like you for some other reason. But that means what? You don't have any access to truth or knowledge that we
Yeah.
don't
Yeah.
have.
Yeah.
Like that
Yeah.
goes that's introducing politics into what's supposed to be a global epistemic system at
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
massive scale. So the AUP used to oppose these, but now they actually, have opened the door to the fact that no, not so much anymore. And of course, they did it in a kind of mealy mouth kind of way. But what we're going to see is that a number of scholars basically say, we're not going to work with universities in Israel, because that's the point
Mm.
of allowing for this, which of course goes against like what academic freedom is supposed to be at. So you're really telling me that some of these professors, some of these institutions, they can't contribute to knowledge?
Yeah. The whole system is so dysfunctional.
Yep.
It's hard to um, it's really hard to put your finger on any one point. I read a again as an example, someone who's become a good friend of mine. Um, it's funny that's a theme in this conversation. But I read Andrew Doyle's book on free speech and just
Oh
loved
yeah,
it.
yeah.
Andrew's great.
The
It
New
just
Puritans.
no, I read that one too. Actually, helped him edit that in the beginning. But he has a book, Free Speech. It's a thin little book. It's very easy to read.
Yeah.
The New Puritans came out subsequent to that, I believe. But it's a really good, quick read that I recommend to people who aren't experts in the field. Oh yeah, there it is. Free Speech and why it matters. Andrew
Mhm.
Doyle. He's comedian and has a PhD from Oxford in
Like you do.
Shakespeare. Yeah, yeah. Um, so let me ask you: do you ever feel like it's just too stupid? It's just too much, and just like like I just don't want to. It's like those sucker fish that clean out the crap in the fish tank, and like I'd rather be like just like why do I have to? Why does I like why do we even have this problem at all? Like this is just too stupid.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the things that helped me a little bit from reading The Fourth Turning,
Uh,
which I went in thinking, oh, some kind of weird quasi mystical theory of history. But it
yeah,
basically talks about certain kinds of cycles that take place, and that situations that tend to happen on about an 80 to 100 year kind of cycle. And I think that we are at a stage where we're seeing a lot of institutional decay, which is predictable. Institutions
yeah,
decay.
hmm,
And I think that most people are not in denial of this being a problem. Just the people in power, a lot of these institutions are still very much in denial. But I have a piece coming out in the Hill, might come out before the show airs, where I give a long list of potential reforms. I think there is a possibility for reform of at least some institutions. That we wouldn't be doing the campus free speech ranking if we weren't trying to convince people go to these
for
places,
sure.
don't go to these places. But we also need counter institutions. We
So
need
you
people who are doing replication stuff all day long. We need some of this knowledge production be checked and rechecked, because a lot of
100%.
it is just, a lot of it's just BS.
Yeah, that's why people hate you, because you say stuff like that we need to. No, I mean, it's just so stupid. Like, it's another layer of stupid.
Not everyone hates me.
No, no, no. But the grief. Anytime you try to point out a problem in the system, people are like, you know. So we're seeing our institutions crumble, and it's so obvious now. You said unless you're in power, and so maybe that's the answer to the question. But like,
Yeah.
it's so obvious to me how we solve these problems. I mean, this is so uncomplicated. It couldn't possibly be more uncomplicated. Like,
Mhm.
if somebody plagiarizes, especially if they're a serial plagiarist, you fire them.
Yeah.
Like, it's so obvious, and it doesn't matter what color they are. They could be pink. They could have some weird mutation that makes them literally pink. The fact that that's so obvious, but yet
Yeah.
we refuse to do it. We refuse to do it. Like, I don't like, it's so obvious to me. And then they put this like lunatic as the head of NPR. Like, it's just so obvious to me
What is
that
truth?
yeah, right. And if you've seen the clips of her talks and you've read her stuff, but like, you would put a centrist in there. And if you really wanted to try to fix it, you'd pick someone who's like broadly conservative. And like, we know how to fix these systems. We know not to require like loyalty oaths.
Yeah.
We know how to stop the long march to the institutions. Like, we know how to do all of this stuff, but we just don't do it. And it's like at Portland State University, again, so these lunatics, destroyed the library recently for Palestine or Hamas or Gaza, whatever they're claiming to be. They destroyed valuable books. The president, there's no accountability at the institution whatsoever. The president did not want the police involved, did let them go out without being arrested. Over $800,000 in damage last time I looked. That's not coming out of her paycheck. I mean, I don't
Yeah.
live in Oregon anymore. I can care less what they tax the people, but it's none of my business. But it's the principle. It's just like, it's almost like we know what to do. And sometimes I think, wow, like maybe there's just an inverse competence hierarchy. Like, maybe we've put the least qualified people at the top to make the worst possible decisions as a consequence, either of undermining the meritocracy or as a natural evolutionary consequence of late stage capitalism. I don't really know, but we do know that these problems are not particularly complicated, but
Mhm.
yet we just don't do them. We don't, and I'm struggling with that.
Yeah, I mean, I think they are complicated to a degree, but I think we need to be thinking really big on reforms. I think absolutely that my biggest issue with the University of Austin is that we need 1,000 of them, and
Yeah,
we
true,
need
true.
and just people, a lot fewer jobs need to require a BA in the first place. And steps that we can get students to not go directly to college, or in some cases not go at all. Like I am sufficiently radical on a lot of this stuff now that I
Yeah,
occasionally will have someone like my good friend, also the name drop, Jonathan Rauch, being kind of like, it
yeah,
sounds
yeah,
pretty like you're getting pretty dark on some of this stuff, and I'm like, yeah, but I also think that's what you need to actually fix it, and that's what I meant by, to some degree, of counter institutions, about like something where it's
yeah,
like,
yeah,
listen, we are, and I honestly think like some of these institutions would probably be smart to get like really high integrity scholars who don't actually put their names on stuff, that just they decide things, but basically come back and give you an F on your research, or for that matter, in some cases, being like, actually, this is fairly rigorous. But the idea that academia is doing a great job of this on its own, and to be clear, like Kathleen Stock said at the Dissident Dialogues,
yeah, yeah,
there's still great research going on things without political valence. Um,
yeah,
and
yeah.
I absolutely
Kathleen, yeah,
believe
yeah,
that's true, but what so many people care about, and an increasing number of things now do have political valence, and if it has political valence, like a right and wrong assumed answer in higher ed, you can't trust them to be objective on it.
yeah. That's right. And it seems so obvious to anyone who's thought about it for 5 minutes.
Mhm.
And by the way, just parenthetically, I love Roush's books. I think I think Roush disagrees with me on just about everything, but I love his books, and they've been very instrumental in helping me in the Constitution of Knowledge, and his writings are
And Kindly
fantastic.
Inquisitors, yeah,
Yeah, Kindly Inquisitors was a
watershed.
fundamental. Yeah, it was a remarkable book. Okay, anything I should have asked you that I didn't ask you?
I think that the spirit within Fire has just made me incredibly proud, because since we really are, the nation's premier defender of freedom of speech, and we defend freedom of speech all across the spectrum, it means that we get people hating us, all across the
For
spectrum,
sure.
depending on what's going on, and that's also indicates to us that we're doing our job right.
Yeah, exactly.
But
Exactly.
not to use a word that is very overused in higher ed, but it's been nice seeing the team, which has expanded so much, feeling really tight with each other, and
That's nice. That's good.
them jokingly referred to it as, comes from trauma bonding.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
you know, but I couldn't be prouder of the work we're doing there.
Yeah, and I thank you for your contribution. I don't mean to be cheesy when I say this, but I'm being very sincere. Like, you're a true American. Like, you
Oh,
really are. Like, defending free speech is like the most fundamental and profound thing that's the one of the root causes of American exceptionalism. It's one of the most important. Not only is it the most important, it's like a bedrock values from which other values can emerge. So I really thank you for what you do and for all that you've done. And so I appreciate that. And I appreciate our friendship. So thanks. That's
absolutely.
great.
Thanks for having me on, Peter, and take care.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. This falls under the umbrella of my nonprofit, National Progress Alliance. Your generous donations keep us going and help fuel content like this. We truly appreciate your support. Thanks again, and we'll see you in the next one.